welcome to, I think it's the 8th year of Subnet Talk by now. And we're gonna talk about material all year long. Last year we talked about the context of what makes art possible. We're gonna start our series this year with Julian Stadon. Stadon, sorry. I just want to say a few words about the format. The format is that Julian is going to give us an impulse, which is going to last between 15 and 25 minutes, and then we open up to a general discussion. I want to thank the HCI and especially Martin for enabling this talk series at the HCI and for being so hospitable, and I want to thank FS1 for recording us.
You thank too.
Yeah. Julian, and we got to know Julian when he was teaching, when he was a lecturer at FH Salzburg a few years ago, and he's been working on understanding biological augmentation and how to use embodied data and data bodies. And he works a lot with mixed media. Currently, he just got he became the head of digital media design at the University of Hertfordshire.
Yes.
And other than this, he's a curator, he's a designer, he's an artist, and he will give us an insight into his marine biologist as well, isn't it? And you're from Australia.
Yeah.
And yes, I think with this we're going to start.
Perfect.
And would you like to say something, Martin?
Nope.
Very good. So please, Julian, start with the talk.
Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for coming. As Rudy said, I have a lot more jobs than just one. I'm still technically working at FR. I taught there today, actually, and tomorrow. I'm still also subject leader in innovative media practice at London College of Fashion, which is part of University Arts London. I run marart.org and a bunch of other less important stuff. So as was mentioned, I've had quite a weird kind of career pathway. I started when I left school studying marine biology. I didn't like that very much. I thought it would be just like Jacques Cousteau stuff, but it's not. So then I started managing bars and running bars and owning bars, and then I did a fine arts degree majoring in sculpture, which led me to AV installation into interactive experiences. Then I discovered this thing that now everyone thinks is super cool called augmented reality back in 2002, and focused on that for many years, for about 8, 9, 10 years. Then moving back into some of my former interests, such as neuroscience, and you guys can read, but basically now I'm interested in kind of converging these things together. And now that I have the freedom of no longer having a specific PhD project to do, I feel like I can finally do this. I don't have any teachers telling me what to do anymore. Yeah, I mean, this is not so relevant. This is my academic studies. I've been lucky that I've managed to work across a range of different industries. More recently, through my work in the fashion school with some big name fashion brands. I've just started a new project with Alexander McQueen, which is super vague, like all fashion technology projects are when they start. Yeah, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about, I'm here to talk about, to begin with, bio-digital networks and how these are converging together. Now, of course, this is quite topical now. We have seemingly every tech research institute is talking about things like AI, machine learning. We also have CRISPR, which is a very high topic in biology. These are all kind of things that I see as bridging these gaps and kind of building pathways between what I used to call and what we used to think of as linear reality models and didactic ontologies. I've been hating on this model of reality for many years, much to my disgrace at computer science conferences, because this is the used model for all augmented reality events. The reason I have a problem with this model is because it's not layered. It doesn't talk about what Deleuze calls the fold. It doesn't talk about networks. And it doesn't address the fact that we're in a, not only we're in a networked kind of system, but the consciousness is also in a network system, which is part of a bigger system, which is biological system, part of an ecosystem, part of a galaxy, etc. Now, what's interesting is this model mapping, which again is not something I'm very good at doing myself, but I kind of can create these complex networks. It's really interesting when you look at it in terms of, I don't know if any of you know the SEED report on collaboration, but this is basically looking at how different fields within arts and sciences and engineering, etc., combine. And it's really interesting how, if you think about it, it looks very similar in these models. Now, all of this is represented really nicely by a friend of mine's poster that he has on the door of his office, which is, I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is a simplified model of the real world. And it's interesting, but I digress. What, of course, like I was saying at the start of this talk, what's interesting, I think, is this convergence between kind of consciousness, but also intelligence. And intelligence is a very interesting word in this current era of Trump and Brexit and, you know, FPÖ and all this other shit that happens in the world. And for me, it's really even more prevalent. So when I first started this kind of lineage of research about 6 or 7 years ago, it seemed a lot less important and almost trivial because it was very speculative. Over this last, definitely half a decade or so, we've had this advent of this era that we call the Anthropocene. You don't need to listen to Slayer. But we also have this, what I kind of call in popular culture and popular image-based culture, this almost like apathy for Anthropocene, or like, we have this kind of like jokiness about a lot of issues because it's, you know, quite often people feel like humor is a good way of dealing with like adverse situations, of course. This is an example of a project a friend of mine's doing where they're using Google Deep Dream and machine learning to try to, and they're scraping Google image searches and Instagram for every burger image. And they're trying to work out the perfect, through color analysis and through different analysis, the perfect ratio of ingredients for a burger. Now, of course, this is totally arbitrary because this could be a tomato, it could be a paprika, whatever. But the point is, it's a kind of a almost like fruitless entity because burger taste is subjective and it's really kind of, it's actually a really dumb project. But we're living in a really, really dumb era, right? So it's kind of strange, but because of this, I think it's almost, and this is obviously just my opinion, but I think it's almost like a time where we really need to, as artists and designers, actually be a bit more serious in a sense. Now, that doesn't mean we need to produce serious work all the time, but we need to at least be serious in the critiques of what we're doing. And here, as Guy Debord says, we need to basically, art should become a more direct organization of more advanced sensations to produce ourselves rather than the things that enslave us. So in another way of thinking, which Debord was always about, in a sense, it's almost like emancipating society from society itself. To put it in a more simple kind of parameter, as cultural producers, we need to be weaving technology into the fabric of nature. So this is one way of looking at my practice and my research. Now, I was thinking about what I actually do with my research, because it's a question quite often I am asked and I kind of go, have you got like an hour? And that's a really shitty question to answer for me. But so I thought I'd just pose some questions and then we can come back and talk about these questions later. So these are the sort of things I'm exploring. How do we move beyond what I call a duality of understanding and of interpretation of disembodiment? How do we move beyond habitual dichotomies of system and user? What methods are available to reconfigure these sorts of things? and also what methods are available, and more importantly, what methods are appropriate to reconfigure reality. Can reductive design accurately facilitate this kind of process? Can technology actually redefine not just embodiment, but anything really? Can biotechnology, same question. How can the body act as an agent in a more embodied way? So my master's thesis was about agency in virtual systems, and which that led into the PhD, because I was thinking, well, it's all well and good building avatars and like being in VR, but like, then what? And then that also started me thinking about what role does anthropomorphism play within this? And how can other senses other than our eyes and ears start contributing more to these kind of systems? And how can other parts of our human biological makeup start being more embedded in these systems? So the lead-on question is how sensorial can realities be? How implicit is the user and user data within such systems? So this is what I'm talking about when I'm referring to embodied data. That's data to do with the user in real time participating in interactive systems. How do we materialize the post-biological, if you agree there is a post-biological? Can we materialize the post-digital? There are 4 or 5 books. Titles involve the words materializing and post-digital. A lot of people, for example, feel like 3D printing is a format of materializing the post-digital. I don't know whether you would agree with that or not. And finally, what about archiving all of this? How do we archive these small little liminal kind of interactions that we have between these spaces? And is that important? So that led towards the PhD project. So I've done a lot of different work. I'm going to just focus on this one today because we obviously don't have all day. So my PhD project is called Data Body Trader, and it's basically about body data augmentation, trading that augmented data, and how that relates to post-biological identity. So the question is, as the talk says, how can biodigital convergence, how can art help us understand that better? And what's the point of understanding that? What is this kind of purpose of this mission? So this all started back in 2008 with this picture, which is really silly. This was my first ever augmented reality headset. We had to glue an old Logitech on here. It's really funny. It looks really like cyberpunk, but it's like really kind of, actually, it's not shit. It's actually quite good. It's like, I really like this headset still. It's the first ever like OLED display headset. And it was really cool. And what I did was, like being a real narcissist, I augmented my avatar out of Second Life and then back in. And I made it so that every time he came out, he'd have a little holiday and he'd wear like a Hawaiian shirt and be like, hey, having fun? But then he'd deteriorate as he developed and he'd turn into this kind of mutated form. And the idea was, what do these transitions really mean? And is there actually an impact? So let's just say if we create 400 different avatars about ourselves, does it actually affect ourselves? Now that started me thinking more about a lot of things. But at the time I was hanging out a lot with Oren Katz, director of Symbiotica, who lives in Perth like I used to. And you know, Oren always says like, you've got to make it real, man. What's all this like fake bullshit about? Like actually make something. You've done a biology degree, you know? So I started thinking about this and what post-biological would actually mean, because I would always argue in post-biological, we don't need to have biology. But anyway, so that led to this project. I'm just going to switch over and play a little bit of this video. I won't play it all. It's 9 minutes long and it's quite boring, I've been told by everyone. So, but it'll give you in word form some of the concepts. Sorry, it's a lot of words. I didn't realize it was like 2 minutes of words when I edited it first time. Oops, sorry. Anyway, that's enough of that, really. So the video goes on, if you want to watch it, it's on my Vimeo. It goes on to explain the processes of each stage of this project. The project has, much like virtual organ trade systems would sound, become a giant monster in my life. I started this in 2009 and finished it about the start of last year. Yeah, so this explains the process, but what I thought would be better is just to talk through this a little bit. So I started thinking, okay, well, I was having a lot of discussions about empty bodies and not having, we don't need a lot of things in virtuality. Why do we even need to be anthropomorphic? And I started thinking, okay, well, this is quite funny, actually. Like maybe I start adding like internal organs to humans. And at the time, I saw an advert for a Murdoch University vet clinic asking for dogs to do CT scans on. And I happened to have a dog, and I thought it'd be really cool if I went to them and said, look, you can scan my dog if you also scan me. And they said yes. So I ended up with this quite high quality CT scans of a lot of my internal organs. And then it was a bit of a, okay, well, now what do I do? So I had this idea, okay, well, what is this relationship between physical or wet bodies and kind of dry software identities? And so I started thinking about that in terms of a mixed reality data transfer system that I'd recently developed using like AR as a bridge to import objects into VR systems, or MMOs to be more specific. So I then started working at the University of Western Australia to modify these organs and simplify them down in a way that's still kind of, in a sense, it's compressing them, but compressing them in a way that gives them less prims, so less vertices. And this allows me to actually import and export them into a system. So as you can see, it's not very, I'm very kind of post-biological here, not very material. Yeah, anyway, so then I had to develop a way of getting these things into this body. So I developed this basic system, which is, again, this is all online, of basically developing a system, importing this into an MMO, which then developed at a residency in TU Graz into a mobile application. And the idea here was that you would have to sign in with a Facebook profile, and then we would data mine you and stream your data. This was really cool and it worked really well, but 2 days into it, Facebook found it and shut me down and logged me out of my account. So I don't know why, like I should have just kept doing it because Facebook sucks, but anyway. This then developed into an organ trade network, which was quite gamified. It was a very fun looking, very gamey aesthetic, which basically an avatar would walk out of the screen, and then you would add organs like this, and then you'd add organs to it, and then it would walk back in the screen, and then it would dump those organs, and then you could buy them or sell them or clone them. You do what you want with them as long as you paid me. Now, the payment thing was kind of arbitrary. It was like 10 Linden dollars, so it was like half a euro. But what was really interesting at the time, I was doing some consultancy after showing this at a conference, ISMAR conference, for doing some medical AR. And what was really interesting for me was that the next year at the conference, this was a finished product that they'd produced and were actually selling for about like 7,000 or 8,000 euro. So obviously I felt kind of a bit like I'd had my organs stolen from me, and it was really, yeah, so it was quite strange because then I did a residency in Banff New Media Institute with someone who actually had a relative in Hungary who had an organ stolen. And she's like, Julian, this is like so like like horrible. You need to make this serious. Like, you're making fun of people losing organs. I was like, oh, okay. So I went back to Perth and I developed an actual stock exchange algorithm. So I actually got lots of money from you buying these organs. So people would buy less of them. Or maybe I'd make more money, one of the two. And so then basically the system was then using the WorldWorks Linden calculator. So it works with the US stock exchange, because I don't know if you know, but the Linden dollar is actually, it's on the stock exchange. So it has an actual US currency value. As you can see here, 15,000 Linden dollars is worth 66 US dollars. So what I did was I made the actual price of organs. There's an online, Haverscope is an online database that's updated quite regularly of prices around the world to buy organs illegally on the black market. And what I did was I built a database with that and a basic algorithm that wherever you were, wherever your server was closest to out of these, it would recognize that and it would price the organ according to where you were. So if you're in Iraq, it would be 20,000 Linden dollars to buy a kidney, for example. This was using an algorithm that was actually quite funny, because I just found it online on an MIT Media Lab open courseware. As literally the first thing I Googled was like stock exchange algorithm, and I found it. Quite lucky. But anyway, then I started thinking, okay, well, how do I materialize this? And how do I actually, because it's still like a game, right? There's no tangible outcome from this. And I think a lot of speculative kind of projects like this stop at this point, where it's like a proposition of what if, and I felt like it needed to be more than that. So I started building 3D printing organs and trying to build really horrible tissue cultures from them, which people were laughing at. And then I started working with our biomedical science head of department. I don't know if any of you know Gay Austin. And we started actually building tissue cultures from this. So somehow this kind of seemed like a nice point of departure from the project, because we actually made tissue cultures grow on the actual organ substrates. And I started doing workshops about how you can do all this at Stadon Linz. And currently I'm actually moved on from biofabrication, and I'm looking more at CRISPR applications, because I think that genetic modification is like growing a new kidney kind of genetically inside of you, or regenerating a broken one, is maybe more interesting and more safe and less harmful, with less impact on a number of different scales than biofabrication. Now, this work was inspired by a number of different people. My two primary influences are people that I actually know and were really lucky enough at the start of my art career to meet, and they were nice enough to hang out with me, which is the people at Symbiotica, and this guy who I'm sure you all know, Stellark. Okay, cool. So that's basically the PhD project, which I'm now writing up. There's a number of other different projects I could talk about, a number of different topics. Being on the write-up phase of a PhD, I obviously have quite a lot to say about all of this, but I'll stop now and I'll get back to the queries, and we can have a chat about biodigital convergence if you want. Okay? Cool. Thanks. So, yeah.
So then the aim is your interest more artistic, or is your aim really going towards creating organs and really using organs? I didn't catch that the gap in between.
No, I mean, I'm realistic about it. Like, when I first started doing this stuff like 8-9 years ago, I thought, yeah, I can make all this stuff, because I was a lot more confident. You know, I didn't have that like Austrian humility that I've had after living here for 4 years. So yeah, I mean, originally I was thinking at least like this is really disruptive. It's going to do all these things, but I think a lot of it, like it's almost like there's become this mission of it, which is like kind of enabling people to feel activated in the way that they're doing this. And I think there's a lot of DIY bio now. There's a lot more, well, I don't know if there is a lot more, but there's, people know what open source is a lot more now. And it's definitely, there's a lot more open design. And so that's part of it. And I think obviously art is a really great way of discussing these kind of things, because we can do it like this over a beer and be a bit like relaxed about it and not be like, it's really serious, or like have fundamentals like Christians run in and try to shoot me or something. But that was like, and I don't know if you guys know, like in the US, this is a thing that happens with a lot of bio artists where they get like emails and letters from fundamentalist groups that saying they're abominations and threaten to kill them.
Wasn't it Cult of Eve where this really crazy shit happened?
Yeah.
The content is also that his girlfriend died next to him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions. How did this end, by the way? You know?
No, I don't know. I just think it's really, I don't know why, but I never seem to get any of this. I think people don't think that like, I don't know. People just like, they look at it and they're like, yeah, whatever, he's an artist. Yeah. What could he do wrong? Yeah, but no, it's definitely art, and I think it's a really good indicator of how powerful art can actually be as a message maker. And as I said at the start, I think it's important for us, to realize that's a certain responsibility. And at the moment, it's really good example, because I'm seeing things of like, people posting selfies with Jeff Koons at like Art Basel Hong Kong. And for me, that's like the antithesis of what art should be. Like a stockbroker who decides like, hey, I know how to break this system and make money from it. I'm going to build a company that makes shit that I come up with. Yeah. Anyway, not to hate on, art too much or conceptual art, but I think I think it's more about art, to answer your question. Yeah.
To me, it seems that the questions that you're raising and the projects that you're talking about have actually little connection, because to ask a question of connecting biological bodies and virtual bodies will never work by creating fake organs. Because I don't feel connected to...
No, but that's the point. And the whole project of this was to talk about like the real problematic intersections of these things. And like, a lot of it, like there was this whole period of about 3 years where it was all about like data mining and, what's the relationship between, I always ask my students this. I'm like, what would you prefer? Like, if I offered you 100,000, let's say 50,000 euro, and you can give me your Facebook profile, or I get your little finger, what's more valuable to you? And they always say, I'd prefer to take your Facebook, which surprises me, because the funny follow-up is, well, what do you use your little finger for? And they all say holding my phone when I'm on Facebook. So it's like this, like I was saying earlier, it's like this snake eating itself. It's like this really paradoxical kind of thing, which again, art is inherently paradoxical. We're always, kind of, in a sense, hypocritical in what we're doing and what we're saying. I think anyway. But also, the thing, I guess to explain it a little bit as well, is the practice component of this started from a very different place. It started from a master's thesis looking at a lot of Haraway. And, Haraway is kind of saying, oh, I'm a cyborg now because I have a phone in my hand. Like I'm already post-digital and post-human because of this. Now, obviously, post-humanism and post-biology are different things. And they're different than post-digital. But I think all of them definitely have synergies. And again, I don't think anyone really explores that. And by making a really problematic, convoluted, overcomplicated work, I think it's kind of, in a sense, it's an expression of that. Well, for me anyway.
But are you trying to what what humans or like me as a person will be in the future, or are you trying to say that everything is already connected and
are you talking specifically about this project or about like the words that I'm using? Because they're kind of two different things.
Again, for me, the questions that you posed here and the artwork that you were talking about don't have a real consequent connection. These
questions came from that artwork. So as you saw before, these questions were at the end of the slideshow and we put them at the start. But yeah, basically these questions are resulting questions that I have from this that lead into, so for the rest of you, I'll just skip through to some stuff. After finishing this project, I was also a little bit like, I felt like there was a lot of questions unanswered, which is why I started curating towards the end of the project, and started looking at the politics of interfaces and looking again at like, what are bodies and how do we archive them? And so I know we're recording this and it's a really like not a smart thing for me to say about to hand in a PhD thesis, but I have so many unanswered questions at the end of my practice component of my PhD. And that's why it kind of led to these different conferences and different symposiums. But in terms of the words and the questions, I think it's much broader, and definitely I'm one of the people who thinks everything is connected. Like I think that like what Roy Ascott talks about with syncretism and everything coming together in that kind of belief system is, I don't know if that actually applies to consciousness, reality, and biosystems as much as he kind of suggests it does. But as we were talking about earlier, things like actor network theory, deterritorial reterritorialization from Deleuze, these things are all kind of good points of reference to talk about how this kind of operates. And the point is, it is really confusing. It is. And then, you know, like I was saying, I mean, adding things like these things where I'm looking at weather, like this was putting weather into Second Life, for which was like whatever. And then this is like, okay, well, why don't we just be outside when we're doing this? So we're actually experiencing the real weather. And again, it's about adding a physicality, adding an embodiment to this experience of embodied interaction. Because I think a lot of it is just really passive. And really abstract. But yeah, so these are all different projects that we've been doing at the moment. I'm in this collective with Jorge Ramirez called Swan Panda. It's a stupid name, but anyway. And what we do is we're doing live weather data and live coding weather data to create audiovisual compositions. And yeah, so I think I like to keep the framework and the wording, like the kind of the ontology around this work, very open and flexible, which does leave, unfortunately, a lot of doors open, but at the same time, it gives you room to play to a certain extent.
But I mean, obviously, there is a connection between the environment or weather or any digital world that we visit that affects us, and it affects our biology and our bodies and everything, and it also connects us in a way. So you were also talking about the connection, or that it's not possible to distinguish between the user and the system anymore, because both intertwined. But the question is, what do we learn from this, or where should we change our thinking then, or our behavior? Because,
well, I think a good starting point is identifying that is true. I don't agree that most people think that. I think most people don't think that. That's like why I was talking about. I think most people still are very much in a didactic system of thinking it's like there's computers and there's us, or like there's the environment and there's us. Obviously, we have a relationship. I think most people understand that, but I think a lot of people don't understand how closely intertwined those relationships are, or how symbiotic they are. And then obviously from that, and this is kind of what I'm saying, with art, with Muruga's question, it's like art's a really good way of exploring that. Because if we're doing it with design, we're trying to make it functional, or we're trying to solve a problem, or there's too much of a point for doing it. Whereas art, we kind of can go, okay, well, what is this? And we're not tied down with like economics or reasons for doing it or all those things. We can just kind of do it and be like kind of honest with our findings in a sense, which I don't know if other fields allow for. Some science does, but yeah, like speculative biology, but yeah.
I would have a follow-up question to that. So one of the questions you raised was looking into what methods are available to reconfigure those embodiments.
Yep.
Then most of your examples, and also many examples from other people, either try to physicalize or materialize what's going on in the virtual world in the physical world, or the other way around, bring, like in your weather example, data or information or content from our physical world into the virtual world.
Yep.
Do you see any potential in creating embodiments that are originally both digital or originally both biological, and not just trying to create that convergence between this and that, but rather are like original only
totally
out of that post biological world?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that actually. That's why we started doing the weather thing, because we want to create a whole new form, like not just the.
But what is weather that is only existing in that mix of physical and virtual? Yeah,
in a sense. So like using a kind of feedback loop, so it develops its own kind of weather. But no, totally. I mean, it's to create original, I almost think you need to be creating hybrids. I don't really think that originals, I don't think there is such a thing as originality. But definitely, I think unique things or emergent forms is definitely, and that's kind of, I think the goal of it. Like this was an interesting project, because it's actually like with this project, I started doing that, and there was a lot of negative feedback, and people like, it's already kind of obtuse enough, and it's already blah, you should simplify. Which is funny, because just this morning I was talking about how problematic the reductive nature of design is, because we're like, okay, let's use semiotics that everyone understands, and like, oh, that's a beer, cool, and but I think emergent forms, and like this is why I find CRISPR interesting, not because of necessarily editing existing forms or fixing existing problems, but more creating new things. And that in itself is quite ethically, in a sense, problematic from a science community point of view. Aesthetically, it's really intriguing. Like, what if I decide I want to genetically modify myself, so I have like 8 fingers and a giraffe neck? Like, I mean, that's obviously a stupid extreme, but why not? Or why not, as you said, why not create? It's funny. I've got another analogy with Second Life, right? Everyone back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when it was cool, like, when we always say like Ars Electronica killed Second Life when they did the show all about Second Life, remember, like 2008, and then everyone was like, it's not cool anymore, it's been done once, no more Second Life. Here we are talking about it. But when I was using it, my colleague sitting next to me, I spent like 7 hours making my avatar look exactly like myself. And he's like, you're so narcissistic. What? I'm just like, what? And he's like, you could be like a cloud, or like you could just be like a anything, and you chose to make yourself look like yourself, and you're not even good looking. Why would you waste your time doing that? It's actually it's funny, but it's a super good point. Like, you know, and I'm really interested in like, why do we anthropomorphize the virtual so much? Like, why do people drive cars in computer games? Like, you could drive a spaceship. Like, why do we, as you said, why do we recreate like what we already have? Yeah. So no, it's a very long answer. I know I had too many coffees today, but yeah, I mean that's the most interesting thing with all of this. Like, and is for the postdoctoral kind of phase is where does that lead to? Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
You just made an example of like transferring the real life things like cars and your own avatar into like the digital world. This is what we like do all the time.
Yeah.
We start a game and
simulation,
make an avatar and just try to like relive the game inside of that. And we try to create like all the real life things in the digital world. While we, for example, Facebook, we have like huge amount of data of ourselves online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like, the thing that is some kind of missing, we can't kind of grasp all the data. We can't, it's not like looking into a mirror and seeing the reflection of yourself. And the reflection being your data. You can't see that. So there is no kind of connection between you and your data online. So you don't know what is going on. This is why we try to create a system that we can sort of grasp and understand. And I think that there is some kind of a missing connection between our data online or somewhere and the possibility to grasp it somehow. I think this would be the first step that we need until we can really build something online or digitally without trying to simulate or like transfer our world into a digital one. But
yeah, totally. I mean, it's that's another reason why I was like, okay, well, yeah, what is that? And that's why this was originally like supposed to be a bit controversial, because it's like, well, that shift occurred just after the NSA thing. Remember Snowden, obviously. And yeah, it was like, shit, okay, we need to build a bridge of understanding between this. The funny thing with that is, as you say, I haven't seen much in that field of research since, and that was 2011, started 2012. So that's 6 years since, and now all of a sudden everyone's like, Facebook gave Cambridge Analytica their data. What? And it's funny now because it's blowing up again, like 7 years later, where people are like, I'm logging out of Facebook. So okay, cool. And it was really interesting. I don't know if you've done this or not. Downloaded the zip file of all your data, and it was less scary and more nostalgic than I thought. Actually, like I was like, oh yeah, that person. I haven't seen them in like 7-8 years. Whoa, like. Yeah, but no, it's true. Like, and it's a hard thing to do because it is. I mean, Facebook's a funny example because you could argue that Facebook is the perfect mixed reality because it's really affecting our reality, or it's really affecting our actual lives. But at the same time, we're creating it. So we're creating this kind of, again, it's this snake eating itself. Like we're creating this kind of monster that allows us to dictate our lives with it by posting stuff and then having to deal with the implications of that. Yeah. And they're all different. I mean, like I think things like Snapchat is super weird for me. Like all my students use Snapchat. They don't use Facebook anymore. And I used to do Facebook groups for teaching and be like, oh yeah, let's do a Facebook group for digital media. And they're like, we don't use Facebook, bro. We use Snapchat. And it's funny because you're not going to Snapchat like, oh, here's a link to a really good art project. Like, so I was like, what do you do? And then it formalizes it because now I'm putting things back on a website, you know, on a wiki kind of thing. And it seems really much more dorky and boring for me than being like Facebook. Maybe I'm a dork now because I still use, I don't know. But yeah, I think Facebook's interesting. And if Snapchat is a good version of a mixed reality for like, what are post-millennials called? This next generation, like generation, no, Y, yeah, Z, I think it's Z, yeah. Generation, like, who fucking knows? Whatever these guys are now. yeah, it's kind of interesting because that's kind of, and they want everything to be ephemeral, you know, so it's almost like this return to not archiving social interaction. Yeah, but no, I agree. It's a weird thing to have to interface, and all these. I mean, even communication. You know, communication methods have become more and more anthropomorphic. Like think of Skype. Like Skype's great, right? Everyone uses Skype. Yeah, and you can see the person, and it's really cool. Like, but then it's weird because you have these same issues you have in like kind of normal real life. Like when my mum called me on my birthday last Friday and I was hungover, I didn't turn the video on because I was lying in bed and I didn't want her to know I was in bed. And like, that's like a normal problem. That would happen if I was back home in Perth and she came to my house. I'd be like, what? Anyway. But that's the thing, like, why are we digitizing just regular day-to-day life anyway? I don't know. Other than communication. And just a one last rant before I move on. The question of big data is really interesting as well, because representation of big data is very problematic. It's also very subjective. And I think that's a real situation that needs addressing, like the subjectivity of data visualization. It's a really good chapter in a book by Alexander Galloway called The Interface Effect, and the chapter is actually called Why All Data is Subjective, I think. And it's a really good point, you know, like however we represent data, or like if any of you have ever done a survey and you do a survey, you know, like, or you do a user testing and you're like, yeah, I'm going to user test this and there's a problem, but yeah, it wasn't much of a problem. And that's what you write in your report, so you get published. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of a weird, data is weird that we have so much faith in it when it's so subjective, I think. And as you say, there's so much peripheral data we're not considering within what we actually get. Yeah, man.
Is this the kind of a sign of our desire to believe?
To believe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to have certainty to some extent, but it's ambiguity, we guess.
Yeah.
And so from my point of view, it's like I think it's getting more and more apparent the deeper we get into this whole data situation. We dream about how is this movie called again with Tom Cruise, where he was like eliminating crime before they happen.
Minority Report. Yeah.
And yeah, it basically comes down to it. As you said, I mean, it's very super subjective.
Yeah. No, totally. It's funny because I got like kind of dead silence when I talked about this in my workshop this morning. I'm like, I mean, is like digital technology like the new world religion? Is that what we're going to do to solve war? But that can't be true because technology starts war. So what? And then it's like, what? But yeah, it's right. It's a kind of it's become a belief system. Like
I think we're moving deeper and deeper into the paradox.
Yeah.
I mean, the paradox has always been there, but it was never as apparent as it is right now. And yeah, it's really mind-racking actually to try to implement all this objective media into a very subjective role.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's not a unfortunate thing. It's a very beneficial thing. But we obviously have many, many years of culture and of philosophy and models like the one I showed that exist of ways that, like, you know, ways of understanding things and believing in things and thinking about things. Like this morning, I was reading that, you know, I read two randomly, like one after the other article, and one was about how we need to move on from the von Neumann architecture. It's Neumann, right? Yeah, because it doesn't really address the way that, you know, computation works on a computer anymore. And then the other one was that we need to get rid of Moore's law as well. Well, these are like the two, like when I first learned computing, they're like the two fundamental like paradigms of computing that you learn, right? So that's kind of really, really funny. And then we talk about like quantum computing and yeah, and then like, okay, so my PhD supervisor is funny because he looks at all of this in this very oldly world context because he's like 72 and, you know, he's like he looks at nanotechnology in relation to like the 7 days that God made the earth. and he looks at quantum consciousness in relation to like looking at mirrors and looking at yourself in the mirror. So almost Lacan, but not really. But like quantum consciousness and quantum, and yeah, it's really funny to hear that way of looking at things, because it's almost like a folk, you know, like folk, like kind of understandings of computing, which are interesting, because, you know, that's what we have, and you know, not everyone does the research that everyone else does, and we understand things. Obviously, we make sense of the world in our own way, or we try to confuse people, like I do in my artwork. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're slowly approaching the end. So we have 2 more questions, please. Or we have 3. After, please.
Yeah, I think if it comes down like to the architectures, it's still like one instruction after another. It doesn't matter which kind of architecture you use. Like you have one instruction after another, it's like one step after another. I think this is the direction we go right now. But we want to have like a faster pace, taking the steps forward. This is what we are kind of used to nowadays, using the internet and like being online all the time, having access to information all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with Moore's. That's why they want to reconfigure Moore's law, because we've moved graphics, like GPUs have moved forward something like what was it? Like 50 times rather than 10 times faster. So it's kind of incorrect. Yeah, but then it's just a different model that speeds things up, like you're saying. So, yeah, yeah.
I think that the biggest problem with those models of computation are not within computation at all, but rather in the way the von Neumann architecture got moved out of computer science into our folk understanding of how the human mind works. And that's the way bigger issue, that people do understand that like the internet or computers are this massive network of things that are like hard to grasp.
Yeah.
But still people think about the human mind as it was a von Neumann machine. And we talk about the RAM, and we talk about the hard drive in the brain and the processing power.
Yeah.
So I think there we do have a way bigger misunderstanding and a misrepresentation by that von Neumann architecture than in computer science, because there that's a minor issue.
Yeah, I think it all went wrong in the 90s. Like cyberculture has a lot to answer for in this, because as you say, you know, yeah, people start talking about like uploading the mind and like my RAM, and these words became almost like, I mean, it's not just the 90s. I mean, Deleuze was doing this with like biological terms in the 60s and 70s, you know. And I know, I mean, I personally really love reading Deleuze. Like, it's like reading a kind of a weird, fucked up poem in a sense. But like, and also I think what he says has a lot of brevity. But you know, because he uses a lot of scientific words that are problematic, and it's the exact same thing with computer science. When you a perfect example is mixed reality, or the difference between augmented reality and augmentation. You know, like the word augmentation has been around for, you know, it's not like it's been around as long as augmented reality, but as you say, they're very almost paradigmatically different things, which is where it gets confusing, because you have scientists on one hand having a clear understanding of what something is, and then you have us, like, you know, guys going, oh, it's like deterritorialized post-biological mixed reality, and people are like, what the hell? Like, what? And no, I agree completely. But I've learned to live with that. Like, I'm really bad at doing it myself. I fall into that trap all the time. But yeah.
Okay, then I think I would want to call the last question. Marius, please.
Yeah. So I have to apologize. You already talked about a lot of different stuff, but I want to come back to this more, because I really got stuck with this idea of convergence, and I'm really confused of what the outcome of this will be, because I also think it's dangerous if we think everything is connected, because it's a different way of connected. I think it's dangerous because then we say, Well, I don't care if someone else dies, because we are all one human body. I can feel it, someone else is dying, and I don't have to care. So I think there is some kind of danger in this picture of what this new convergence or this new organism that is created out of the combination of biology and technology. I think it really has a different quality that does not allow us to ignore very common day-to-day problems that we are facing now. So I really think we have to address these problems that you mentioned before, like the shit we're dealing with. Because the outcome of what the development brings will not be a solution to all these problems. They just will make them worse, probably, because this kind of and I don't know what it's creating. I don't think it's a body, because I think the body has one consciousness or one center of steering or something like that. I'm also not sure if it's an organism, because you still have these at least the biological identities, even if all the digital systems are connected and behave as one body, but the biological still will be separated in a way. So any convergence between these two will not create one single thing in the end. And this is, I really have a problem to understand what the outcome of this whole continuing process will be. I mean, maybe you have an answer. Oh,
is that a question?
Sorry to interrupt, but I also have a hard time understanding this.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I have one proposal to understand your question. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Is your question about if everything is connected, where's the responsibility and who's in charge? Or
no, my question, I'm really questioning this idea of everything is connected, because I think it's too easy. I think everything is connected, but it's not connected in a way that is as easy as these questions were posed, like user and system, they are one. If that's true, then I don't have to care about so many problems, and therefore I think it's not true. But on another level or scale, it might be true. So the question is that this answer or the outcome of your practice phase of your PhD is probably still too easy. I mean,
come on, man, it's 9 years of my life. Give me a break. During this time, I've learned like how to program computers and biofabricate organs, dude. Like, it's not that easy. You're forgetting that whole production part of it. Yeah, it's really funny. While you were saying that, I just found this slide of, you know, bio-digital conversion. No, anyway. Yeah, maybe like code will just become conscious, and we'll have like we'll have like DNA code convergence, and then they just say like, we don't need anything else. They'll just exist somehow.
Yeah, but it will never be one. That's what I'm saying.
There's this movie with Dustin Hoffman in it, and you keep reminding me of it. What's it called? He's like, everything is made up of little bubbles, and then, like, it's all disconnected, and then he argues with his arch nemesis. He's like, everything's all one and it's all connected. Like, do you know this?
No.
I gotta remember the name of it and tell you, because this is like you're doing this movie right now.
Okay,
yeah,
with this
cool.
we're gonna end here, I think.
Great.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.